Maria cleaned airplane toilets and swept floors. Passengers ignored her. Pilots barely noticed her. But when Flight 227 started spinning toward the mountains with 147 people screaming, the simple cleaning lady stood up. Nobody knew she used to design the very planes she cleaned. Today she would save them all. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Maria Santos woke up at 4:30 a.m. like she did every weekday. Her small apartment was quiet and dark. She made a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the city lights. In 2 hours she would be at the airport, ready to start another day of cleaning airplanes. She put on her blue cleaning uniform with "Airport Services" written on the back. The uniform was simple and practical, with lots of pockets for cleaning supplies. Maria was 42 years old and had been cleaning planes for 3 years. She was a small woman with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of hard work. People at the airport knew her as the quiet cleaner who did her job well and never complained. Flight attendants would nod politely when they saw her. Pilots barely noticed her. Passengers looked through her as if she wasn't there. To them, she was just another airport worker doing a simple job. But Maria had a secret that nobody knew. She wasn't always a cleaner. Years ago, she was Maria Santos, PhD in aeronautical engineering from MIT. She had graduated at the top of her class and worked for Boeing for 8 years. She designed safety systems for commercial aircraft. She knew everything about how planes work, their engines, their hydraulic systems, their electrical networks, their flight controls. Her colleagues respected her expertise, and her designs had made flying safer for millions of people. But in 2019, the aviation industry faced serious problems. New plane designs had safety issues, and companies had to lay off thousands of workers. Maria lost her job along with many other engineers. She applied for jobs at other aerospace companies, but the industry was shrinking. Months passed without any offers. Her savings ran out and she had to take any job she could find. That's how she became a cleaner at Denver International Airport. It wasn't the career she had planned, but it kept her close to the airplanes she loved. Every day she would board different aircraft and see the engineering marvels she used to help design. Sometimes she would notice small problems, a loose panel, a worn cable, a small leak, and she would quietly report them to maintenance. The maintenance workers thought she was just observant for a cleaner. They never suspected she could read aircraft technical manuals better than most pilots. Maria lived alone and sent money to her elderly mother in Mexico every month. She had no family in Denver and few friends. Her old engineering colleagues had scattered across the country looking for work. She spent her evenings reading aviation journals and keeping up with new developments in aircraft design. It was painful sometimes reading about the exciting projects she could no longer be part of, but she couldn't stop learning about aviation. On Tuesday morning, October 15th, Maria arrived at work at 6:45 a.m. Her supervisor, Tom, gave her the day's assignments. "Maria, you've got Flight 227 this morning. Boeing 737-800, arriving from Chicago at 8:15. Full cleaning, it's continuing to Los Angeles with 147 passengers. The plane's been having some minor maintenance issues, so the turnaround might be tight." Maria nodded and gathered her supplies. Vacuum cleaner, trash bags, cleaning solutions, fresh blankets and pillows, and restocking materials. She had cleaned this particular aircraft many times before. It was a well-maintained plane about 12 years old with a good safety record. She knew its layout perfectly: 147 seats in economy class, 8 in first class, 6 flight attendant stations, and all the service areas. When Flight 227 arrived from Chicago, Maria watched it taxi to the gate. She could tell just by looking that the plane was healthy. The landing was smooth, the engines sounded normal, and there were no visible leaks or problems. But as an engineer, she knew that the most dangerous problems were often invisible. As passengers deplaned, Maria waited with her cleaning cart. She smiled at the tired travelers and stepped aside as they hurried to make connecting flights or find their baggage. When the plane was empty, she boarded through the rear door and began her work. The passenger cabin was typical for a morning flight. Coffee cups and newspapers were scattered around. Someone had spilled juice on seat 14C. A child had left crayons and coloring books in seat 22A. Maria worked methodically, row by row, collecting trash, wiping down tray tables, checking seat pockets, and vacuuming the aisles. As she worked, she listened to the flight crew preparing for the next flight. Captain James Mitchell and First Officer Susan Park were experienced pilots with good reputations. They were discussing the weather forecast for the flight to Los Angeles. Some turbulence expected over the Rocky Mountains, but nothing unusual. But then Maria overheard something that made her engineering mind alert. Captain Mitchell was talking to a maintenance technician about a hydraulic system warning that had appeared during the flight from Chicago. It was just a brief yellow light, the captain said. System pressure dropped for maybe 30 seconds, then returned to normal. We wrote it up in the logbook. The maintenance technician looked at his clipboard. Yeah, we've seen this warning a few times on this aircraft over the past month. We've checked the system twice. No leaks, pressure tests normal, fluid levels good. Probably just a sensor glitch. We're monitoring it, but it's not a safety issue. Maria continued cleaning, but her engineering mind was troubled. She had worked on hydraulic systems for years. Intermittent pressure drops were rarely just sensor glitches. They usually indicated small leaks that were hard to find, or component wear that hadn't been properly diagnosed. On a Boeing 737, the hydraulic systems controlled the flight control surfaces, landing gear and brakes. A failure could be catastrophic. But she was just a cleaner who would listen to her concerns. She had learned not to offer technical opinions after a few embarrassing incidents when maintenance workers had politely told her to stick to cleaning and leave the aircraft engineering to professionals. She finished cleaning the passenger cabin and moved to the galley areas. The flight attendants were boarding and preparing for the next flight. Maria recognized Sarah Chin, the head flight attendant, who had always been kind to her. Sarah was restocking the beverage cart when Maria approached. "Excuse me, Miss Chin," Maria said quietly. "I couldn't help overhearing about the hydraulic warning. Has the plane been pulling slightly to the left during flight?" Sarah looked surprised. "Actually, yes. Captain Mitchell mentioned yesterday that he had to make small adjustments to keep the plane flying straight." "How did you know that?" Maria hesitated. I've cleaned this plane many times. I notice things. Maybe the maintenance people should check the left side hydraulic actuators more carefully." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'll mention it to the captain." "Thanks, Maria. You're very observant." But there wasn't time for a detailed inspection. The passengers for Flight 227 to Los Angeles were already boarding. Maria finished her work and gathered her supplies. She had been assigned to clean 2 more aircraft that morning, but something made her hesitate. Her engineering instincts were screaming that something wasn't right with this plane. She made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving the aircraft, she quietly took a seat in the last row. Flight attendants often let cleaning crew ride on flights if there were empty seats, though Maria had never done it before. She told Sarah she needed to get to Los Angeles for a family emergency. It was a lie, but she felt compelled to stay with the aircraft. The boarding process took 45 minutes. Maria watched the passengers file aboard: business travelers, families with children, elderly couples, college students. All of them trusting that the aircraft was safe, that the pilots were competent, that the maintenance was proper. None of them knew about the intermittent hydraulic warnings, or that a former Boeing engineer was sitting in the back row, deeply worried about their safety. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park completed their pre-flight checks. All systems showed green lights. The mysterious hydraulic warning had not reappeared. The weather forecast showed some turbulence over Colorado, but nothing severe. It looked like a routine flight. At 10:30 a.m., Flight 227 pushed back from the gate. Maria felt the familiar sensation of aircraft movement and heard the characteristic whine of jet engines spooling up. Despite her concerns, she still loved everything about flying. The power of the engines, the precision of the flight controls, the miracle of a 150,000-pound machine lifting gracefully into the sky. The takeoff was smooth. The Boeing 737 climbed steadily through 5,000 feet, then 10,000 feet. Maria looked out the window at Denver shrinking below. The Rocky Mountains stretched ahead, their snow-covered peaks glittering in the morning sun. For 30 minutes, everything was perfect. But as they reached 35,000 feet and entered the turbulence zone over the mountains, Maria felt something wrong. The plane was shaking more than normal. Not just from turbulence, there was an underlying vibration that didn't feel right. She had felt this before during test flights when hydraulic systems were beginning to fail. In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell was also noticing problems. "Susan, I'm getting intermittent pressure warnings on the hydraulic system. Look at this." The yellow warning lights were flickering on and off. System pressure readings were fluctuating wildly. "Should we declare an emergency and return to Denver?" First Officer Park asked. Captain Mitchell studied the instruments. "Let me try to isolate the problem first. We might just have a bad sensor." He began running through diagnostic procedures, trying to determine which specific component was malfunctioning. But in the back of the plane, Maria could feel what the instruments couldn't yet detect. The slight vibration was getting worse. The plane was pulling more noticeably to the left. Her engineering experience told her this wasn't a sensor problem. This was real hydraulic system failure, and it was getting worse fast. Then, at 10:47 a.m., everything went wrong at once. The primary hydraulic system failed completely. Warning lights filled the cockpit like a Christmas tree. The plane suddenly banked hard to the left as the flight control surfaces lost power assistance. Captain Mitchell fought the controls, trying to level the aircraft. "Hydraulic system A is gone," he shouted to his co-pilot. "Switching to backup system." But the backup system lasted only 30 seconds before it failed too. The plane's hydraulic fluid, under enormous pressure, was pouring out through a rupture that maintenance had missed. Without hydraulic pressure, the pilots lost most control over the aircraft's flight surfaces. The Boeing 737 rolled into a steep left bank and began a terrifying spiral dive. The aircraft was essentially falling out of the sky, spinning like a leaf in a hurricane. The nose dropped sharply, and the plane began accelerating toward the rocky peaks below. In the passenger cabin, chaos erupted. People screamed as they were thrown against their seatbelts. Oxygen masks deployed automatically as the plane lost altitude rapidly. Flight attendants, despite their training, struggled to maintain composure as the aircraft spun wildly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, strained but professional, "we are experiencing a flight emergency. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of the flight attendants. We are working to resolve the situation." But privately he was radioing Denver Air Traffic Control. "Mayday, mayday. Flight 227, we have complete hydraulic failure. Aircraft is in uncontrolled descent. We need immediate emergency response." The altitude counter spun downward, 33,000 feet, 31,000 feet, 28,000 feet. At this rate of descent, they had perhaps 8 minutes before impact with the mountains. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park tried everything in their emergency procedures manual, but nothing worked. The plane continued its deadly spiral. Passengers were crying and praying. Some called loved ones on their cell phones to say goodbye. Parents held their children tightly. The elderly couple in seat 12A sat holding hands, facing death together after 50 years of marriage. Maria unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Fighting against the centrifugal force of the spinning aircraft, she made her way forward through the cabin. Other passengers grabbed her arm as she passed. "Where are you going?" a businessman shouted over the noise. "We're all going to die." "Sit down," a flight attendant called out. "It's not safe to move around." But Maria continued forward, using her knowledge of aircraft layout to navigate through the spinning cabin. She had to reach the cockpit. She was probably the only person on the plane who understood exactly what was happening and what might be done about it. The plane was at 25,000 feet and still falling when Maria reached the cockpit door. Sarah Chin, the head flight attendant, tried to block her path. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. The pilots are handling the emergency." "Sarah, listen to me," Maria said urgently. "I need to talk to the pilots. I know what's wrong with this plane." "You're a cleaner," Sarah protested. "The pilots don't need distractions right now. I'm an aircraft engineer," Maria said firmly. "I used to work for Boeing. I designed hydraulic systems like the ones failing on this plane. Let me help." Sarah saw something in Maria's eyes, knowledge, confidence, authority, that she had never seen before. Against regulations, against her training, she opened the cockpit door. Captain Mitchell was struggling with the flight controls, sweat pouring down his face. First Officer Park was going through emergency checklists, trying to find some procedure that might work. Neither man looked up as Maria entered. "Captain," Maria said loudly, "I think I know what's happening to your aircraft." "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Captain Mitchell said without looking back. "We're dealing with an emergency situation." "Captain, I'm an aeronautical engineer. I used to work for Boeing on hydraulic systems exactly like yours. This isn't just hydraulic failure, you have cascade system failure. The hydraulic leak has damaged your backup control cables too. That's why none of your recovery procedures are working." Something in her voice made Captain Mitchell finally turn around. He saw not a frightened passenger, but someone who clearly understood what she was talking about. In desperate situations you listen to anyone who might have answers. "Even if you're right," he said, "what can we do? We've tried everything in the manual." The altimeter read 20,000 feet. Maria studied the instrument panel quickly, her engineering mind analyzing the situation. "Your manual assumes you still have some hydraulic pressure or cable control. You have neither. But you still have engine thrust differential. May I try something? With no other options and death approaching fast, Captain Mitchell made a decision that violated every regulation he knew. Try it. Maria took the pilot's seat and began working the controls in ways that weren't taught in any flight school. Instead of trying to use the disabled flight control surfaces, she began using the engines as steering mechanisms. By increasing power on one engine and reducing it on the other, she created uneven thrust that began to counter the aircraft's spin. "This is crazy," First Officer Park muttered, but he assisted by making the throttle adjustments Maria called for. Slowly, gradually, the deadly spin began to slow. The plane was still falling but not quite as fast, and the terrible rotating motion was decreasing. At 18,000 feet, they achieved something close to controlled flight, though the aircraft was still descending and difficult to steer. "We're not out of this yet," Maria said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We need to land immediately. The plane is barely controllable and we're losing altitude. Where's the nearest suitable airport?" "Denver International is our best option," Captain Mitchell said. "But we're 60 miles away and we're only at 16,000 feet. "We can make it," Maria said, "but it won't be pretty. We'll have to approach faster than normal and the landing will be long and hard." For the next 25 minutes, Maria helped fly the crippled aircraft toward Denver. Using techniques that combined her engineering knowledge with the pilot's flying experience, they kept the plane in the air and generally pointed in the right direction. It was like trying to steer a car by adjusting the engine speed instead of turning the steering wheel, possible, but requiring constant attention and skill. Denver Air Traffic Control had declared an emergency and cleared all runways. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the airport. News helicopters hovered at a safe distance, broadcasting live coverage of the emergency landing attempt. The approach was terrifying for everyone on board. The plane came in much faster than normal, with the pilots unable to control their descent rate precisely. They hit the runway hard, bounced twice, and rolled much farther than a normal landing. But the Boeing 737's landing gear held, and the plane finally came to a stop 2/3 of the way down the runway. The moment the aircraft stopped moving, the entire cabin erupted in cheers, tears, and prayers of thanksgiving. They were alive. All 147 passengers and 6 crew members had survived what should have been an unsurvivable accident. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft within seconds. But there were no serious injuries, just some bruises and a few cases of shock. The passengers deplaned using emergency slides, many of them stopping to hug Maria and thank her for saving their lives. Captain Mitchell shook Maria's hand with tears in his eyes. "Maria, I don't know your last name, but you saved 153 lives today. How did you know what to do?" "Santos. Maria Santos. And I knew what to do because I spent 8 years designing safety systems for planes like this. I never expected to use that knowledge as a passenger, but sometimes life surprises you." The story made international news within hours. Video of the emergency landing played on every major news network. Reporters wanted to interview the mysterious cleaning woman who had helped save Flight 227. But Maria was overwhelmed by the attention and initially avoided the media. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigated the incident thoroughly. They found that Maria's diagnosis was exactly correct. A small hydraulic leak had gone undetected during maintenance inspections, and under the stress of turbulence, it had caused a cascade failure of multiple systems. Her unconventional use of engine thrust differential had been the only way to maintain any aircraft control. Ms. Santos's technical knowledge and quick thinking prevented what would certainly have been a fatal crash, the NTSB report concluded. Her actions represent one of the most remarkable examples of passenger heroism in aviation history. Within a week, Maria received job offers from Boeing, Airbus, and 3 other aerospace companies. She chose to return to Boeing, where she was hired as a senior safety engineer with a mandate to improve hydraulic system maintenance procedures and develop better emergency training for pilots. 6 months later, Dr. Maria Santos was back where she belonged, using her expertise to make flying safer for everyone. She developed new diagnostic techniques for detecting hydraulic problems before they became dangerous. She created training programs that taught pilots her engine differential steering techniques as a last resort emergency procedure. Her work was implemented on aircraft around the world. But Maria never forgot her time as a cleaner. In her new office at Boeing, she kept her old cleaning uniform hanging on the wall as a reminder. She often spoke at aviation conferences about her experience, always emphasizing the same message: never judge people by their job titles or appearances. Skills, knowledge, and heroism can be found in unexpected places. She also started a scholarship program for unemployed engineers and workers who had lost their jobs due to industry downturns. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said. Sometimes you have to clean planes for 3 years before you get the opportunity to save one. Today, Maria is recognized as one of the leading experts in aircraft emergency procedures. But she still returns to Denver International Airport occasionally, visiting the crews and workers she knew during her time as a cleaner. They treat her like a celebrity now, but she always reminds them that she's the same person she was before, just wearing a different uniform. The passengers of Flight 227 stay in touch through social media and meet annually on October 15th to commemorate their survival. They call themselves the 153 and have become like an extended family. Many of them have visited Maria at Boeing to thank her again and see the important safety work she continues to do. Sarah Chin, the flight attendant, often tells new crew members about the day she opened the cockpit door for a cleaning woman who turned out to be their savior. In aviation as in life, she says, you never know where help will come from. Stay humble, stay alert, and never underestimate anyone. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park both received commendations for their role in the emergency, but they always credit Maria with making the rescue possible. She didn't just save our passengers, Captain Mitchell says. She taught us that expertise and heroism can come from anywhere. The most important person on your flight might be the one you least expect. The young woman cleaning planes today might be tomorrow's hero. Maria's story reminds us that extraordinary people often work in ordinary jobs, waiting for their moment to shine. We should never underestimate anyone because the person we barely notice might be the one who saves our life when everything goes wrong. And somewhere in the skies above us right now, flights are safer because a cleaning woman refused to give up on her dreams and was ready when her expertise was desperately needed.